Hey guys, TechManager with a video for you guys. In today's video, we're going to compare the new iPhone 14 Pro with the iPhone 13 here that was released last year. In this video, we're going to talk about the hardware, the software, the overall camera, and the battery life and performance of both of these devices now, and finally try to answer the question if it's worth upgrading from the 13 to the 14 Pro, or if you just want to know what the upgrades are and the feature differences between this phone. Stay tuned as we're going to discuss all of that and much more. So as you can see here right now in my hand, here is the 14 Pro, which is the new one that just came out, and then the iPhone 13. Now this is the regular 13 model, not the Pro edition, because there is the Pro edition. So the comparison isn't exactly one-to-one, but it's still a good comparison if you're thinking of switching over to the Pro lineup. So as you can see here right now in my hand, again, they're pretty much, just by looking from the front, you really can't tell much of a difference because of the software they're running on, which is iOS 16. Again, both of the phones are actually same size body. As you can see, 6.1 inch display phone. This one is, again, as you can see, just about similar without that top notch any longer. Now there's this dynamic island. That's kind of the new feature, just looking from the front. So the price point between these two phones are slightly different because the Pro starts at $999 for the 128 gig. That's usually the model how iPhone has been doing for the Pro lineup, was that $1,000 mark, and then the regular 13, which isn't the Pro model, starts at $699, and this one you can actually buy still from Apple. Unfortunately, you can't get the 13 Pro any longer or the 13 Pro Max, so this one you can actually get from Apple's website directly here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the overall here. As you saw, so size wise it's different. When in terms of weight, the 14 Pro is a little bit heavier. I think it's just a little over 7 ounces, and the 13 year weighs just under 7 ounces. So again, because of some things that you'll notice in the back here, which first thing is the camera differences. There's the Pro lineup always features 3 cameras, and you get now an upgraded 48 megapixel camera along with two 12 megapixel camera. On the 13 here, you just got that two 12 megapixel camera. So upgrade in terms of camera feature we'll discuss a little bit later. And of course, other things you'll notice here is the color shade of it. Now the iPhone 14 Pro comes in the 3 base colors, which is kind of silver, gold, and the black edition. And then for the very first time is this deep purple that we're seeing. Again, this is a darker purple than the other models that have the purple edition. On the other hand, the iPhone 13 Pro actually comes in 6 different colors that you can get it. Here, as you can see, is the blue one right in the back there. There's a pink one. You can also get it in black. You can get it in green, white, and red as well, and of course the midnight color. So quite a few choices when it comes to color choices. Now other differences you won't see over the cover here, but in terms of the hardware here, there's slight differences. So on the 14 Pro, they come built in with these sensors that allow crash detection. So if you're in a crash, the iPhone 14 Pro can call emergency services if needed, and there's also the ability to do emergency SOS via satellite, and that's only available on the 14 Pro and the Pro Max lineup here. And of course, other differences between them you'll notice here about the same in a lot of ways. Both of the phones do have 5G, that's M&M wave on the US model, but the biggest probably difference in terms of physically on these two phones is that the 13 still has that physical SIM card, so you can put a physical SIM card. Unfortunately, on the US model in some of the countries, the 14 Pro no longer has a physical SIM. You have to use eSIM to activate it. Now, why that makes a difference is if you're on the travel or in the go and you switch out a SIM card a lot, this is where the 14 Pro is at a disadvantage, and the 13 Pro is a better option in that sense. Probably one of the reasons why people stick with the 14 lineup here. Other things that we want to talk about on this phone is the battery life. So battery life are slightly different between these two phones. So the iPhone 14 and Pro and the 13 actually has very similar battery size, around close to the 3200 mAh battery. But when it comes to battery, there's also the software aspect, which makes a phone slightly different in terms of the performance, that the efficiency they get. You get around 23 hours of video playback on the new 14 Pro here. On the iPhone 13, you get 19 hours of video playback. 4-hour difference. Again, it's still huge in terms of the differences, but on a regular to a light, if you're a light to a medium user, most likely both of the phones will get you through most of the day without much problem. And if you're a heavy user, probably the 14 Pro will outlast, of course, the 13. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is going to be the camera upgrades. As you saw here, Of course, 3 versus 2, there are some upgrades. But if we look in the feature here, a couple things you'll notice here when it comes to things like optical zoom, we go up to 15, where you only get 5 here. That, again, is a difference that you'll probably notice. Both of the phones do have portrait mode, of course, when it comes to that. Now, both of the phones do also have a capability to record up to 4K 60 frames per second. But on the other front is this new feature. This is action mode that's only available on the 14 lineup here. Unfortunately, you don't get that option on the 13. Aside that, there's also other things like Pro RAW, which is only available on the Pro lineup because Pro RAW is, and then for macro mode as well, which isn't available on the 13 here. So those are going to be some differences when it comes to it. Of course, we mentioned the upgraded camera, 48 megapixel versus just those 212 megapixel camera. Again, the iPhone 14 Pro does beat the 13 in terms of when it comes to camera specs. Now, moving on to the next aspect of the phone is the software here. So you may wonder why that matters. Well, both of the phones actually run iOS 16. Pretty much you can upgrade the 13, which originally came out on iOS 15, and of course the 14 comes pre-installed with iOS 16, and both of the phones can pretty much take advantage of all the features that iOS 16 has to offer. There isn't much that you get it. So both of the phones, again, are pretty much good. Now, when you start to test out applications, you'll notice here both of the phones pretty much have the same sort of feature when it comes to application. All of the applications are supported, running stable, whether it comes to entertainment apps, video streaming apps, to social media apps, all of those apps. So even your shopping apps. So if you're looking for a discounted iPhone, make sure you guys check out the links in the description section for eBay or Amazon, where you can get even the iPhone 13 if you're still interested in getting it, or even the 14 Pro at a discounted price instead of paying full price from Apple. So as we mentioned here, when we going to launch both of the phones, trying to use most of the popular apps, as you can see here, they're able to just do exceptionally well. There isn't really much to say about the software because most of the time the software is pretty stable on both of these phones on iOS 16. There has been some bug fixes, but again, we were able to update it and run both of the software without really any issue whatsoever. So both of the phones, as you can see here, using iOS 16 and running pretty smoothly here. Now, I would say one thing in terms of gaming, when it comes to gaming, now regular gaming, it's fine. You'll be able to game both phones, like 2D, even 3D games, without much of an issue. Both of the phones, again, will do that, no issues there. Now, when it comes to heavy graphic games that are meant to be played on the console, one thing to note between these two phones, this phone is slippery a little in my hand, but one thing to note is the RAM that you get on both of these two phones. So the iPhone 14 Pro has 6 gig of RAM versus 4 gigs of RAM on the 13 here. Now, that's a difference when it comes to those games that require a lot of resources. This is where the 14 Pro is going to win in the heavy graphic game. Pretty much games that are meant to be played on the console, which probably isn't recommended to play on the iPhone 14 anyways. But that's one thing we want to mentioned for you guys. And in terms of the hardware, the chipset, again, on the iPhone 14 comes with the new A16 Bionic chip versus the A15. So slight improvement. We've seen around 24% efficiency and speed in terms of some of the speed tests. Again, might not be really noticeable for a regular user, but something we like to mention for these two phones. So those are kind of other things to mention. Now, let's really talk about between these two phones, why you would pick one versus another. So let's start with of course, the iPhone 13 model. So the iPhone 13, of course, it's a 1-year-old phone, but nonetheless, it'll probably be good for another 4 years, no doubt, even 5 years, because how long Apple usually supports the software of this phone. Now, the other thing to mention, again, it's a lighter weight phone, and then the big thing about the 13 is probably going to come down to your budget. So this phone, brand new, you can get it for $699, as you mentioned, directly from Apple, even lower if you buy it pre-owned, probably around $450 to $500. So if you're looking for a budget-friendly phone, still really relevant. The iPhone 13 by no means is lagging in terms of the things. Of course, there's new features that you don't get, as you mentioned, like crash detection or the dynamic island, and then upgrades in the camera and a little bit of battery life upgrade. But aside that, the 13, again, phenomenal in its choice, and then the price, almost half the price if you buy it pre-owned. Even new, you're paying almost 60% and the price of the iPhone 14 Pro. Now, why would you consider the 14 Pro Now, the 14 Pro, as I mentioned, it's the Pro lineup, so you're going to get all of the features that come with the newest and the latest and the greatest iPhone 14 here. So, a lot of upgrades there. But if we really talk about the upgrade, what are those upgrades? We mentioned the upgrade around the rear camera having able to have 3 times the optical zoom. We see this other feature, which we didn't mention, is the with this display here, you have now 120 hertz refresh rate. Unfortunately, the iPhone 13 itself only gets the 60 hertz refresh rate, unlike the counterpart 13 Pro lineup, which does have 120 hertz refresh rate. So you're getting upgrade in the refresh rate. The other thing that you'll probably notice now for the very first time on the iPhone is this always on feature. So if you go into display and brightness, you'll notice this option, which only is available for the iPhone 14 and the 14 Pro Max. So if we do this, as you can see here, if we close that one out, pretty much it's kind of not going to work. So as you can see, that's going to be another upgrade you're looking at. Along with those other upgrades, there is a new version of Bluetooth that's available, which is version 5.3. You got also new faster memory. So if you're doing a lot of saves and recording and trying to do a lot of stuff with the memory of the phone, you have LPDDR5, which is just simply a little bit faster memory on the iPhone 14 Pro. As we have also mentioned, in terms of the benchmark testing we did, the iPhone 14 Pro does give you about 24% better performance on some of the benchmark. And again, 6 gigs of RAM versus 4 gigs of RAM, of course. And finally, the price you're paying starts at $999 and can't really get much discount, even though the phone just came out. So it might be a couple months down the line where the prices go down. So that's kind of the comparison. Is it worth upgrading? Again, something, of course, it depends if you're looking for those minor upgrades. So jumping from 13 to a 14 Pro, you really don't get much of upgrade besides the 14 upgrades itself. But again, if you're in the market for it, I would probably recommend, go with whatever your budget kind of accounts for, because you'll get pretty much most out of both of the phones nonetheless. So hopefully you guys found this video helpful, and we want to inform you guys what's your thought on the 13 and the 14 Pro. Which one do you like? Leave a comment in the comment section. Thanks for watching, guys. See you guys next time.